So if you've got a Bible this morning, if you can turn to Matthew chapter 1, and I'm going to be reading kind of selected highlights from Matthew chapter 1. I'm not going to read the whole thing. And so track with me. If you don't have a Bible, don't panic. The words are on the screen. This is the Word of God. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar, and Perez the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Ram, and Ram the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon the father of Salmon, and Salmon the father. I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be Salmon, but it looks like salmon, doesn't it? So we'll go with Salmon. Salmon the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. And David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah. And Solomon the father of Rehoboam, and Rehoboam the father of Abijah, and Abijah the father of Asaph. We're then skipping on 17 generations to verse 15. And Eliud the father of Eleazar, and Eleazar the father of Mathan, and Mathan the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called the Christ. Then verse 21, she, Mary, will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. This is the word of the Lord. One thing that Christmas brings into focus often is family, and that brings with it this blend of joy and tension and heartache. We think about the family that we want to spend it with, the family that we wish we didn't have to spend it with, the family we wish we could spend it with, and then the family that we would give almost anything just to spend one more with them. This is such a mixed bag, isn't it? You know, that word is such a mixed bag. And this season, I think, really shines a spotlight on just how mixed it is. I love this quote, you can choose your friends, but you sure can't choose your family. And it's not just from To Kill a Mockingbird. This is like a sort of ancient proverb. And I think it just shows how, like, family is a super complex thing. It can be a source of blessing, and it can also be a massive source of carnage. And a number of years back, I was having a conversation with somebody, and they kind of really caught me off guard because they said, is my family too screwed up for Jesus? Like, is my family too messed up even for Jesus to be able to do something about? And then they kind of asked an even deeper question, which was, have I screwed up my family too much for Jesus? And like, it was a question that really that stung, because I think the deeper question in that person's life was this. In this time when we remember God himself becoming a human baby and stepping into this world in order to live the life that we couldn't live, to die in our place, to rise again, and to now be seated at the right hand of the Father. In what Jesus is doing in this world, am I welcome? Or am I too messed up? Is my family too messed up for Jesus? Well, here's the thing. Unlike us, Jesus could choose his family, right? Now, track with me on this. God, the eternal Son, had a hand in choosing his own family. He got to choose. Like, we didn't get to choose our parents, did we? We don't get to choose our wider family. Like, God the Son, in eternity, had a choice about which family he came to earth through. Now, you know, if you were God, and you were choosing a family to unite yourself to come into the human race, which family would you choose? Surely you would choose a sort of wealthy, influential, from a kind of power nation. And I did have loads of pictures that I was going to put on the screen, and I thought that would be hugely unhelpful. So I deleted all of them, because you'd just have been thinking about those people then for the rest of this morning. But which family would you choose to be born into? Because you know the family tree of Jesus that we've just read through? Like, even the very best of those is like a who's who of screw-ups. Now, there are three in particular that I want to draw attention to in that whole family tree. But you know, as we walk through these kind of snapshots in Jesus' family album, I want you to ask yourself this question: are you welcome? Because you know, if these are who the eternal Son of God chose to enter the human race through, are you welcome? Like, is this good news for you? Now, here are the three that I want to draw attention to. In the family tree of Jesus, there are 5 women that are mentioned, including Mary, and 3 of them are named. Now, you might think, well, that's no biggie. Actually, that's a huge biggie, because in that culture, you know, Matthew's writing this biography of Jesus, and he's including 5 women in this biography. Women were never included in the family tree. It was always the man had the man-child, who had the next man-child, who had the next man-child. And yet Matthew mentions these 5 women. This is hugely significant, because it means that God has a significance for these women. And it's not just about women. It's about God's heart for those who, in whatever culture, in whatever age, are regarded as being of lesser importance. God has a role and a significance for them. The next thing about these 3 women is that none of them are Israelites. None of these are from the chosen nation. This tells us that God wants to rescue all nations, that this is good news for the whole world. And not only that, but these 3 women have all got something kind of seriously sketchy, either in their origin stories or in their own personal stories. You could kind of summarize it like this: schemer, sinner, stranger. And I guess, to some degree, this probably includes all of us. But here's the bottom line. The family that Jesus chose to be born through are the people who needed saving from their sins. These are the people who he would die for, to rescue and to save. And do you know what? His salvation kind of works backwards and forwards. And that's really good news for all of us. He came to seek and to save the lost, not from a distance, but by joining himself to a human family, uniting himself to a human family in love. And so I just want you to keep this question in mind. And guys, you already know the answer to this question. So we could just pack up right now and go home, couldn't we? Because we already know the answer to this question. But track with me, because seeing the answer to this question is really important, and being convinced of the answer to this question. And so you'll know, we're going to look at these kind of 3 family snapshots from the Jesus family album. Now, the first one is Tamar. And this is a super sad story. Like, this is a super tragic story, right? Now, in Genesis, what you've got... Now, how many of you know about Joseph and his rather jazzy coat? Yeah? No, most of us know the story of Jazzy Joseph and his jazzy coat, right? And Joseph's brothers hate him because of his jazzy coat, and so they plot to kill him, but then they decide they'll get more money from selling him, so they sell him into slavery. He goes down to Egypt, and we're tracking with the story of Joseph. But then, bang, into the middle of this story of Joseph, you got this story of Tamar. Because Joseph's brother, his eldest brother, Judah, who's a proper dodgy Herbert, right? He's like, there's nothing nice about this guy. He marries a woman called Shua, and they have 3 kids, Onan, and Shelah. Now, I did wonder about the naming of the first child. Did they just hesitate when they went to register? And then, well, that just got written down. So anyway, they find a wife for and that wife for is this lady called Tamar. Now you think, well, family wedding. That's lovely, isn't it? You know, beautiful. No, because was an even dodgier Herbert. And we don't have the details about what he did, but evidently what he did was so bad that he got judged and he died. Now, in that culture, what normally would happen is if a husband died and left the wife childless, she would marry the next brother. And the next brother would then they would have a baby, and that baby would be kind of like he would belong to the brother that had died. And you might think this all sounds really awful, but it was a kind of economic social security thing. You know, it was a protection for the woman. And so Tamar marries Onan, and Onan is also not a very nice guy. And I'm not going to go into the details this morning because that would not serve my purposes. But you want to know the details, go ahead and read Genesis 38, right? Onan decides that he's not going to do the duty of conceiving a child for his brother, and he also is judged and he dies. So now Tamar has been widowed twice. You think, flipping heck, this woman has been, like, she's experienced it bad, but it's going to get worse because there's this third brother that she should be given to, and yet Judah thinks that Tamar's got this whole kind of black widow thing going on, and so refuses to give his third son to Tamar. Now, not only has she been widowed twice, but she's experienced a massive injustice here as well. Now, what's she going to do about that? Well, you think, actually, there are probably mechanisms by which she could kind of get this injustice undone, but she decides that she's going to come up with her own scheme. And it is not a great scheme. It is not a wholesome plan. Because what she does, knowing that Judah is a dodgy Herbert, she dresses herself up as a prostitute, and she puts herself kind of in the way of where Judah will be walking. And she entices him because she knows that Judah is enticable. And so she entices him in, and obviously she's got her face covered, and he says, well, I've got no money. And she says, well, what will you give me as a kind of pledge, to prove that you're going to pay me? So he gives her some items of his property. She takes the items of the property, off he goes, and then sends the payment through like a servant. But the prostitute is gone because the prostitute never actually existed. Fast forward several months. Tamar is pregnant. Oh, uproar. Judah's like, oh my goodness, she's such a foul woman. She's horrible. She's terrible. She deserves to die. Who is the man that has done this? And then she kind of pulls out the items of property from her pocket and says, the owner of these. Judah crumbles. And he says, she is more righteous than me. So then you come to the birth story, and she's having twins. Now, often when there are twins in the Bible, let your kind of little antennae go up because, like, twins are a really important kind of feature of Bible stories. Anyway, not enough time to go into that. And the birth story, there's so much that we could pick up on here this morning, but there's just one thing that I want us to pick up on, okay? Birth story. When the time came for Tamar to give birth, it was discovered that she was carrying twins. While she was in labor, one of the babies reached out his hand. The midwife grabbed it and tied a scarlet string around the child's wrist, announcing, this one came out first. But then he pulled back his hand, and so out came his brother. What? The midwife exclaimed. How did you break out first? And so he was named Perez, which actually means breaking out. Then the baby with the scarlet string on his wrist was born, and he was named Zerah. Now, I only want to pick up on one thing there, and that's this scarlet string. Often, whenever you see scarlet yarn or scarlet threads throughout the Old Testament, it's a sign that God is working out his purposes in salvation. Did Tamar make any good decisions in this story? No. She made some awful decisions. Not godly schemes. And yet you fast forward to Matthew chapter 1, Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, by Tamar. And Perez, the father of Hezron. God redeems the schemes of Tamar, and this mistreated outsider with a desire for justice becomes part of the story where God writes himself into human history. You think that's amazing? We're talking about Tamar now as the great, however many generations, grandmother of Jesus. She will bear a son. You should call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. Have you ever made what seemed like an irredeemably bad decision, or come up with a really awful scheme that has had consequences that have just rippled out and out and out and out? In his hands, the worst schemes, surrendered to him, he can turn for beauty. The worst, most seemingly irredeemable people and situations, he can turn for beauty. He saves his people from their sins. The same goes for you, the same goes for me. And so question, if Tamar is the great-grandmother of Jesus, are you welcome in his family? Not convinced. Okay, second snapshot. Now, Fast forward in the story, God's people have been in slavery in Egypt. They've come out of slavery. They've been in the wilderness for 40 years, and now they're about to go into the land that God has promised them. And so they send out spies to scope out the land. And they send in these two young men to spy out. But the king of Jericho, which is this big fortified city, becomes aware that there are these two spies. And he knows where to send his men to search for these guys. He sends them to the house of Rahab. Now, Rahab is a prostitute. And so this isn't an esteemed occupation. This woman would have been mistreated and abused by men. And so the king's men goes to this place to look for the spies. And when they get there, she says, oh, no, they were here, but they've gone. And they've done a runner. And I saw them running out of the city. And so you better go after them quickly. And so the king's men chase them, but the men are actually on the roof, and she's hidden them under a bunch of like bamboo or flax or whatever. And she, having been on the rough end of so much treatment by men down the years, actually entrusts herself to these spies because she knows that God is on their side. And she says to them, you know, when you come into the city, just remember me. And they say, tell you what, take this scarlet cord, hang it out the window, and when we see the scarlet cord, you and everyone that is in your house will be saved. And so, you know, when they invade then, they do this, and it's like one of the weirdest military tactics that you've ever seen. They kind of march around the city seven times for 7 days, and they blow trumpets. That's all they do. And then on the seventh day, they blow trumpets, and they shout, and then the walls fall down. The only people that are saved in Jericho are Rahab and her family. And you know, something that I'd never spotted until this week, and this is just, I love this. Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belonged to her because she hid the men Joshua had sent as spies to Jericho. And it's this bit here, right? When this account was written, she lives among the Israelites to this day. She didn't just get spared and then tolerated. She was welcomed in. She was embraced. This outsider was brought in, and she came and lived among them. Not only that, but fast forward in the story, we discover that she married someone. She married this guy called Salmon. Do you call your child trout or halibut? Of course you wouldn't. Anyway, she married Salmon. And they had a child, at least one child, called Boaz. Hold that thought. And you know, I love Rahab. She even pops up in the Faith Hall of Fame in Hebrews chapter 11. This list of people that we are supposed to model our faith on. And it says, by faith, Rahab the prostitute, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. She's a model for our faith. This is wild. God redeems this brave woman with a past, and he gives her an incredible legacy and a future. She will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. Rahab the prostitute becomes part of the conquest of the promised land, and she becomes part of the family line of Jesus. So, question. You know, in the story that he is still writing, are you welcome? In his family, are you welcome? Guys, we know the answer. But just in case you're not convinced, third snapshot in the family album. It's the story of Ruth. And so the story of Ruth starts, and it's just before kind of King David becomes King David, for obvious reasons. You'll kind of track why King David hasn't yet become King David in Ruth's story. Anyway, there's this family, and so there's a mother, a father, and two sons. You've got Naomi and Elimelech and their two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. And there's famine in the land, so they decide to go to Moab. Now, immediately, if you're an Old Testament reader, you'll know kind of woo, 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 red flags. As soon as you see Moab is bad news. They're going to Moab, and Moab was a nation that had its kind of origin story in incest. Like, it's a terrible, horrible story. And they're natural enemies of Israel. And so they go into Moab. Bad move. But then the two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, whose names mean sickness and destruction. Now again, why would you do that to your kids? Mahlon and Chilion, sickness and destruction, marry these two Moabite women. Again, marrying Moabite women. Woo, 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 this is bad news. Okay? But then the father and the two sons all die. Bad move. Well, it's not a bad move. They kind of couldn't help it. They just sort of died. And Naomi decides in bitterness and grief that she is going to move home. She's going to go back to the land of her family. Now, cut a long story short, it was supposed to be both daughter-in-laws that went with her, but in the end, only Ruth went with her. And you know, Ruth is from this nation that's got a horrible origin story, and yet Ruth is just this beautiful character. Oh my goodness. She is loyal, she is faithful, she is loving. And there's this moment where she says to Naomi, where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. She is loyal, she is faithful. And so they go, and Ruth becomes the breadwinner. And Ruth goes out gleaning. And the whole thing with gleaning was where you had farmers that would grow stuff in their fields, they would send out their harvesters, and anything they dropped, they couldn't go back to catch. They had to leave that for people who were less fortunate to follow on behind and to collect up the stuff. Now, Ruth was just happened to be gleaning in the field of a man named... Could we have a little bit of a drum roll for this? You know, if you got your... Come on, keep it going. Because you need to see this, right? Drum roll. The guy whose field that she was... You can stop now. The guy whose field she was gleaning in was called Boaz. Whose mum was Boaz? Yes! Do you see how it's all starting to kind of weave together here? Now, Boaz, he's from the same clan as Naomi, and he's got a massive heart for hospitality and generosity. And you wonder whether that was part of the experience of his mother having been welcomed in. She kind of bred this into her boy. Now, cut a long story short, Naomi, as a mother-in-law, comes up with the most super sketchy scheme for getting Ruth and Boaz together. Like, it is super sketchy. Like, you read it, and there's so much in there, and there's so much in there that's kind of like also hidden meaning kind of stuff, and you think, flipping heck, you actually wanted to do that for your daughter-in-law. But Ruth, because she's kind of loyal and faithful, she decides that she's going to go along with Naomi's super sketchy plan. And this super sketchy plan was full of potential disaster. Like, if Boaz was any lesser of a man than the man that they thought he was, then Ruth was in trouble. But you know, Boaz is a total don. He's a massive gentleman, and he treats Ruth beautifully. He's got this desire to honorably bring Ruth into the family. And you know, cut a long story short, it all works out. And this Moabite, this stranger, is adopted in, welcomed in to the family. And then at the end of Ruth, we get this little bit of family tree. Look where the family tree begins. Now, these are the generations of Perez, who was the son of Tamar. Perez fathered Hezron, Hezron fathered Ram, Ram fathered Aminadab, Aminadab fathered Nahshon, Nahshon fathered Salmon, Salmon fathered Boaz by Rahab, Boaz fathered Obed by Ruth, Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered David, which is why David wasn't king at the start of this story, because he hadn't been born. And Salmon, the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz, the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of David, the king. Do you know, these women all became part of the lineage of King David. They became the great-grandmothers, the great-great-grandmothers, the great-great-great-great-great-grandmothers of royalty. But you know, that was astounding enough, and yet David is the ancestor of a far greater king. She will bear a son, and you will call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. Ruth is an outsider from an enemy nation with a sketchy origin story, and yet she is welcomed in. God writes Ruth into the human origin story for God the Son. Not the origin story. His origin story is eternal. But his human origin story, he was born. And this story is a story of salvation from sin for everyone who will give faith to him. It's a question, would he welcome you into the story that he is still writing? This family that he is still gathering? Because here's this story. He takes schemers, and he takes sinners, and he takes strangers. And I think that could pretty much describe all of us. And he redeems our schemes, and he covers our sins, and he adopts the strangers into his family, and he makes them his own. And you know, these 3 women that are named in his family tree, like I said, it's unheard of that women would be included in what Matthew wrote. And yet it shows that God is about welcoming those in every culture who their culture shows disdain for. He takes outsiders and he welcomes those that the world regards as aliens and strangers and foreigners. And his heart is for the nations. His good news is to fold all of the nations in. And he welcomes those. Oh, and church, this is such good news. He welcomes those with sketchy histories. He welcomes those with a past, and he redeems them, and he gives them a hope and a future. And do you know what? I can take the them out of there, and I can put in there us. These women foreshadow just how far the reach of the gospel goes. He came to save his people from their sins. He came as the Son that the Father so dearly loved, that whoever believed in him would not perish, but would have eternal life. It's a question. You know the question, and you know the answer. And you know the welcome that he gives us, it is not based on anything that we do. The welcome that he gives us is all by faith in Jesus. It is all his grace. It is all his kindness. And this faith that itself is a gift is a transforming faith that overcomes our past and gives us a new hope and a new future. Are you welcome? You get to answer this. Are you welcome? Yes, you are. You are welcome. And you know, Jesus said that everyone who comes to him, he will never turn away. He will instead unite anyone who comes to himself in love. And not only that, but then we become part of this beautiful story that he is writing. We become part of the family that he is forming, this family that is adopted and eternally loved. And your only part in this is to come to Jesus and place your faith in him alone for this life and for the one to come. That's all we got to do. Do you know, we are never the first movers. We are only ever responding to his grace. And so, you know, as we come to respond this morning, I want to say that, you know, if you've never come to the place of giving your life to him, if you've never come to the place of handing your life over to him, and you want to, then if you came with somebody this morning, then talk to them about it and ask them to kind of talk you through what that means. Or if you didn't come with anyone, come and talk to me. I'll be there. I would be delighted to. Remember that we are always responding to his grace. We are always responding to his initiation. He's already made the first move. You want to know what a first move looks like? It looks like being on the throne of glory and shoehorning yourself into the size of a human baby. That's what it looks like. That's what the first move looks like. The first move looks like living the kind of life that we could never live, showing us the kind of humans that we were created to be. The first move looks like being nailed to a cross to carry the sin that we could never carry for ourselves and placing so that we could place our faith in him and have life. That's what the first move looks like. The first move looks like rising from the dead. The first move looks like being seated at the right hand of God. And do you know what he's doing right now? He's praying for you. He's praying for you, because that's what he does. That's what the first move looks like. And so if you've never responded, never taken the second move to that, let today be the day. And you know, if you have given your life to him, reflect on his grace to you. Reflect on his kindness to you. Reflect on his goodness to you. And then I want to encourage you this morning, if there's specific testimony of something that he has done in your life, come and share it, because the fact is that there's probably somebody here this morning who needs to hear that testimony of how he's taken you from being lost to found, dead to alive, how he took you from having a past that you didn't want to be associated with, and he has given you a future. how he's taken you from being an outsider and how he has adopted you into his family. And I also want to encourage you that if you belong to him, but you feel like you've been wandering away from him, he's the one who comes near. And you know when you feel like you've been walking away, you know when you turn around, you know how far away from you he is? He's right there. Because he is always the first mover and he's waiting for you to return. And then for those of you this morning who are grieving over family that seem far off, and you're thinking, how are they ever going to come? How are they going to come to a place of knowing Jesus and having life in him? The King became a baby, and he came near. And so you know if he came that near, is there any situation that is too broken or too far off? Is there anyone who is too far gone to receive a welcome into his family by faith? This is the first time that you get to answer this morning, no. There is no one that is too far off. You're welcome. Shall we pray?